Hello everybody and welcome to Parks Bros. It's Drew here, and today we're going to be heading back to Six Flags Magic Mountain for our full in-depth review of X2. X2 originally opened as X on January 12th, 2002, and was changed over to the X2 moniker after a large renovation, with a new paint scheme and new trains being installed in 2008 at Six Flags Magic Mountain, and was officially the first 4D coaster. It being made by Aerodynamics is one of their last projects before going out of business. But let's get into the stats on this ride. First, we got to start off with that height. It is 175 feet tall at its highest point, but it does feature a 215 foot tall drop, which I gotta mention also is 88.5 degrees nearly straight down, and we'll talk about that more later on. Of course, that pretty crazy drop leads to a 76 mile an hour top speed and a track length of 3,610 feet. In terms of numbers of inversions, there are technically 2 Raven turns, but there are plenty of moments where you're going to be upside down and spinning all around when you might least expect it. With all that out of the way though, let's figure out how to get there. X2 will be that first coaster that you'll see when you're driving toward the main parking lot. It will be right next to that main entry road. But once you get parked and ready for your park day, hopefully putting on some sunscreen, head into that park entrance, take a quick right and left at the entry fountain, past the carousel, past New Revolution, and up the main pathway towards Viper. Now this is where it gets a little confusing. You don't want to go all the way to Viper. You want to turn right before you get to that front entrance where you'll see a sign for X2. Then you'll encounter a little entry plaza with a big statuette of the logo. You'll want to turn right across the bridge that you just went under and keep walking that way. X2, while included in the Baja Ridge section of the park, is kind of on its own. So you'll want to keep following that pathway till you get to the entrance proper, which is going to be a good couple hundred feet away from that so-called entry plaza. Hopping into line, you'll be greeted with some switchback sections having posters talking about whether you're X enough for this insane ride. Eventually you'll end up heading down a ramp and then being split into 2 separate sides of the station. One will lead you up a ramp heading toward the left, and one will take you up a set of stairs on the right. Do know, though, that this is because, due to the constraints of the ride itself, there are 2 separate loading platforms, one on each side of the track, because the cars don't sit right on top of the track, at least where the seats are. The seats are off to the sides. Once you get up to the station, make sure to pay $1 for that locker that you will need to purchase if you have a large bag or any belongings, and then head to your preferred seat of choice. Sitting down in the X2 seats, I gotta say, is very interesting in comparison to any other roller coaster I've been on. For starters, there's like this big bubble column, I don't know how to describe it, right in between where your legs are going to be on this experience, so that's a little odd to try and hop over. Although on ride, you won't really notice that. Once you're able to sit down though, this is where it gets really interesting. These restraints, while technically being over the shoulder restraints, come in from the side, making a full vest-like system to keep you in your seat. So to put this restraint on, I guess, imagine you're putting on a zip-up hoodie before pulling that hoodie in and buckling it together. So this restraint does kind of wrap around your torso, but due to the nature of the restraint itself, don't be too surprised by a little bit of pressure toward the center of your chest. But once that's all buckled up, you want to make sure that your seat has been pulled downward enough to be at the right height for your shoulders. That's right, the entire seat backing goes up and down depending on your height, so make sure you get that down toward the right spot so your head can have a gentle rest, and the rest of that vest restraint, if you will, is at the proper position. Now, if getting this restraint on wasn't a mess enough, get ready, because we're about to roll out that station. As you hear the omnipresent audio throughout the station telling you that you are not prepared for X2, you'll slowly start to roll out the station backwards. That's right, you start this journey backwards, and you'll even have a nice, lovely audio track playing before you start turning toward the lift hill, and that audio track changes entirely to none other than Metallica as you start heading up that lift hill. All the while this is happening, your seat is being rotated as you flip backwards, looking straight up toward the sky, and then eventually leveling out to get one of the best views of any park I have ever experienced. Getting to look over all of Magic Mountain from the top of your hill and the top of the lift hill. While you're going up this lift hill, you should hopefully be having plenty of recognizable pop culture quotes being thrown in there to intimidate the heck out of you, because this legitimately might be the most insane coaster experience you can get in the Western Hemisphere. Before you know it, you'll end up hearing "We Are High Up" with a coinciding heartbeat that will just get your heart pounding as you slowly slip backwards into what feels like falling in your worst nightmares. This split second, though, is nothing in comparison to what's about to come when you flip forward facing the ground before plummeting 215 feet all the way down as you are staring at the ground. This is not a view that any human should be able to get safely, and is easily one of the most insane moments on any coaster I can think of. And I'm sure you can see in this footage, it is a little bumpy, and I won't lie. This ride as a whole is quite bumpy. It likes to bounce back and forth while you're changing in that rotation angle, and we'll talk about that more later. But on the first drop, you shouldn't have to worry about that too much at all. At the final second, though, you'll flip toward the direction you're about to head in what feels like you're trying to perform a front flip, which you effectively do. So all of that G-force, the positive G's that hit you as you hit the bottom of that drop, push, making, of course, for a way more comfortable experience than if you were still facing the ground. As you suddenly feel like you're being rocketed upwards into that first Raven turn, you will feel a little bit of bumpiness, and don't be surprised if you hit the back of your head a little bit on this element, especially if you're sitting in the front on this moment. But to be able to move like this on a coaster is just phenomenal. To be looking straight down at the ground before just doing a tuck and roll, before literally shooting off into the sky like you have rocket boots. It's just insane to think that this coaster now effectively is almost 20 years old. As you plummet back toward the ground, though, you'll start to go into a Superman position before flipping back and eventually upside down as you do a full backflip before leveling out again. On any other coaster, this is effectively just a simple drop followed by a hill going upward. But on this, it's a full-on inversion and a flying coaster in one. Talk about making the most of an almost simplistic straight track. During this moment, though, make sure you're smiling or screaming and crying, either or, because this is where the photo will be taken on both sides of the train. Just before encountering most likely the tamest part of this whole ride experience, a right-hand turn, twisting you all the way back around 180 degrees. This is your breather moment in comparison to the insane first drop and inversion before the next couple moments we'll talk about in just a second. And as I said, I would mention this moment can get a tiny bit bumpy, but of course, since you're not really doing much, it's just something you'll notice in passing because you don't have anything else insane to focus on and envelop your mind with at that point in time. But before you know it, you're diving back down to what looks like a full-on 0G roll. Once you start heading up this kind of half inversion, you'll start flipping forward in the most disorienting part of the entire ride. You go from sitting up facing forward to flying like Superman upside down in about 2 seconds. It just is straight up unnatural in every way. As you soon start to sit straight up while facing backwards at this point now, if you're lucky, and I mean this, if you are completely lucky, you will get an insane moment of flame effects on this coaster. And I gotta say, you feel the heat when this rarely happens. It is just such a cool little added effect, just like the music at the beginning of this coaster. But while you're focused on that, that's when you'll head into the second official inversion on this ride, the final of the coaster. This is another Raven turn, and is most likely the most infamous part of this roller coaster. As you rotate in a way that makes you still face exactly in the same position, but end up changing directions, this part of the ride pulls some extreme G's. I mean, we're talking higher G forces than I can even think to express. But there's also this little thing that I kept mentioning, right? That bumpiness, well, it comes back with a pure vengeance at this moment in the ride, shaking you all around. Especially if you're in the back row, you will get brutalized, and I mean that literally. It just bounces you back and forth like crazy for only a good second maybe, but that's all it needs to make you go, ooh, maybe I'm not riding again. But outside of that first drop, that has easily got to be the most intense and insane moment of X2, and while you're still processing that, you'll be flipped slowly into the brake run in one of the more calming moments of the ride. But if you were to put this on any other coaster, you'd be like, what the heck, that's insane. But you know what? That's just X2 for you as you slowly ride into the brake run and eventually the offload station and the main station itself. Grab your stuff out of the locker, head down those ramps and out past the photo booth to the entrance of X2 again. And here's the next question you gotta ask. Are you riding again? Diving into my full thoughts on X2. It's a real mixed bag, I'm not gonna lie. The first time I rode this coaster, the bumpiness took away everything from this experience. It was the first coaster I rode at Magic Mountain. That probably wasn't the best choice, but I didn't really have much say in that at the time. But I remember coming off of that coaster saying, never again. That was too bumpy, too ridiculous. And then I rode Viper immediately after and loved Viper. Thought Viper was one of the coolest coasters I've ever been on. A lot of people definitely flip that consensus nowadays, especially. But yeah, I'm not gonna lie. When I first rode X2, I straight up hated it, really. I thought it was way too intense, way too rough to enjoy properly. Well, now I'm on the complete opposite side of that spectrum. I sit in the back outside seats of this coaster, which is said to be the roughest and most painful seats on the ride, but it's become my favorite spot to experience X2 in all of its crazy might. Is it the roughest experience? Yeah, probably. But it's also the most intense, and I can't help but find myself laughing like a giddy little kid every time I hit the brake run and my legs are flailing all over the place. X2 has definitely flipped a switch for me in terms of what I prefer to ride nowadays. I even find myself liking the more intense coasters in comparison to a lot of those airtime machines that have been so prevalent in the past 10 years especially. Now, I understand this is not everybody's cup of tea. I mean, heck, I hated it when I first rode it, but now I have come to loving it. If I'm at the park and it doesn't have that long of a wait, I will definitely try and get everybody in my party to be on board with riding. But I also won't lie to you, it's not something I go out of my way to ride every time I'm in the park, because I almost have to be in a certain feeling for that experience. If I'm feeling a little off or I have a slight headache from the rides earlier in the day, I might end up saying no to X2, at least on that visit at Magic Mountain especially. I mean, it is literally the park with the most coasters in the world, at least as of recording this, and X2 is almost that perfect cherry on top. Or I guess I should say imperfect cherry. Some people are gonna love it for its bits of bitterness, that just crazy punch that no other coaster at the park will be able to give you. But some will want something sweeter, something more enjoyable classically. Something like the Revolutions, the West Coast Racers, the Twisted Colossuses. That's more of your sweeter side. But if you want to go for what X2 really is, at least in comparison to the rest of the park, I would say it's the baby of Viper, Tatsu, Goliath, and even Batman and Riddler's Revenge in a way. It's just this crazy amalgamation of a heck of a long time of roller coaster development, and I would even argue one of the pinnacles of this crazy engineering pursuit to make us humans feel as if we're close to death. Well, I gotta say, X2 definitely pumps your adrenaline up more than any other coaster I've experienced so far. Just a quick tip though before we move on to my full ratings. If you want a little bit of a smoother experience, definitely sit on the inside seat, meaning the seats closer to the track on either side. Or if you're like me and you want a little more of a crazy experience, sit on those outside seats. I mean, as I said, my personal favorite seats are the back outside seats. Second favorite though would have to be probably the front inside seats if I'm feeling like I don't want as crazy of a ride that day. I think that's a perfect spot to be because that view is honestly unparalleled, especially for that first drop. But if you want that whip on the first drop, back is an easy option to choose. Heading to my ratings though, this review is officially the end of the first batch of my Magic Mountain roller coaster and ride reviews. So if you haven't seen one of these before, make sure to go check out all the ones that are available in the playlist, because my first full ranked, rated, and reviewed from Six Flags Magic Mountain will be coming out literally tomorrow. But if you've seen a lot of those reviews in the past, you know I have an unorthodox rating system. First, I gotta start it off with a ski slope rating, pretty much telling you how experienced of a roller coaster rider you should be before taking on something like X2. Ratings out of 5 stars for intensity and fun, and of course, an overall score out of 10. That's my personal score, of course, but I hear you. Stop blathering and let's get rating. So, with the ski slope rating, I gotta say this is easily a double black diamond. You should be a heavily experienced roller coaster rider before taking this coaster on. To me, this is the most intense coaster I have ever been on. And with that spinning seat inclusion, it just makes it absolutely absurd in every way possible. This should not be your first coaster. This should not be your second coaster. This should not be your third coaster. It shouldn't even be your 5th or 6th coaster. I mean, this thing is just ridiculous. Ride everything at the park before you take on X2, with potentially the only exception to that being Tatsu. That is the second most intense coaster at the park, at least in my humble opinion. Heading to intensity though, I mean, easy 5 stars. Everybody kind of could figure that out already, I'm sure. This thing is the most intense roller coaster I have ever personally been on out of the 155 I've experienced, and I could never give it less than a 5-star rating on that. For fun though, that's where it gets a little iffy for me. This coaster is in no way meant to be fun at all. But for me personally, I might have to pump it up to 3 stars, but I could totally understand a 2-star rating rating as well. For me, I don't know, I just find a lot of these elements really incredibly hysterical at this point, just because they are so insane, so just otherworldly. I can't help thinking to myself, wow, this is just stupid in the best way imaginable. Like, who would think to be able to try and do this? Heading to my personal rating out of 10 though, this is where it's gonna get a little weird, I'm not gonna lie, for some people, probably expecting me to say this, or maybe even expecting something lower, but this to me is a 10 out of 10. If you asked me 3 or 4 years ago, I would have said this is an easy 5, but nowadays, man, I have come to adore this coaster. It blows me away every time I ride it, just how intense something can be, and at some points even how graceful it can be, even though it has a lot of those rough spots. Believe me, if this thing was smoothed out completely, I don't know if I would enjoy it as much, because it takes away some of that variability. But the only main complaint I guess I could give is maybe hoping for one more element throughout the entire length of the layout. To me, the ride maybe feels a tiny bit short, but at the same time, if there was one more element on this ride, I don't think I would go back to ride it nearly as many times, because there's a 50-50 chance this ride would beat you up almost too much at that point. But with all that said, make sure to let me know what your thoughts on X2 are down below. I would really love to know what you guys think of this aerodynamics masterpiece down in the comments. And of course, while you're down there, make sure to go check out some of the links down in the description, including the brand new Parks Bros pins celebrating 10,000 subscribers. And of course, thank you all so much for 11,000 subscribers, which we hit just a couple days ago. And if you have not yet, make sure to subscribe, because that ranked, rated, and review video talking about all of the roller coasters at Magic Mountain and my personal opinions and ratings of them will be out very, very, very soon. So make sure to stay tuned for that. And of course, all of the Knott's Berry Farm reviews in January of 2022. But of course, until then, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next ride.